I'm wondering, as a process of, you know, as a process shaped by our rulemaking, how pushing the judgments about whether someone is qualified for ordination or not to essentially, you know, down from the GA. I'm wondering how that plays out, because I could see a scenario whereby you have a lot of pockets of sort of a groupthink, pro and against, and then you've really got a kind of non-geographical, maybe to some extent, sort of cultures of how to do this. So then, and we don't have in the past, you know, because I think, okay, so you've got the two culture wars going on, maybe even across the corner of the same street. You know, people leaving churches to be with people who are having an affinity to their viewpoint on these questions. And so now you've got this culture war going on within the church, and that doesn't play out too well, I think. But I'm wondering if there's some thought about that. But more importantly, you know, a lot of these movements for social equality, the kind of the progressive nature of human politics, and these, and suffrage and slavery and so forth, you know, I'd bet on the liberals in all these issues over time, and I'm wondering if by pushing, you know, when you had the GA at the very top saying this is the definitive guidance on this issue, and historically we're being pushed to be more inclusive and welcoming of all people, recognizing people as worthy of equal human rights in the church and elsewhere. We've given that up by pushing the decision-making into a more local process. So now we're missing out on this opportunity to stand as a united church saying, we've all come around. I mean, it was worth fighting this out, however horribly it felt, over time in order to come to a unified position where we're all on the same page. Doesn't this process of pushing the decision-making down, ghettoizing different affinity groups, actually steal from you know, people who are concerned about this, the kind of unanimity of finally coming to a unified position?
I'm not sure this is any different than has been the case in a lot of other issues. You mentioned some. You know, the story that if you have 4 Presbyterians in the same room, you have 5 different points of view, 5 different opinions. And that's always been the case. Michael mentioned that the Amendment 10A does not mandate that any particular presbytery or any particular session must ordain people who are in same-sex relationships, but allows it. I think you mentioned women. The ordination of women followed a similar trajectory, but I'm not sure has had much of a different outcome than what you just described. Initially, it was allowed that a session might ordain women as elders, and that would be in the 30s, certainly by the 40s. It wasn't until the middle 50s that presbyteries were allowed to ordain women. And
as ministers.
As ministers, excuse me, as ministers, yes. But by some time ago, by 1983, and probably before in the Northern Church, my memory is failing me, but it was required and is now part of the brief statement of faith that God calls men and women to all of the offices in the church. Does that mean that women have an equal chance of being ordained every place, in every church? Churches and presbyteries still make distinctions based not just on sexual preference, but on sex in the first place. And probably there's nothing that can be done about it. I think you're probably right in saying that it's a good thing to have a church-wide witness. We may come to that. We'll see.
I would call your attention on the second sheet of this resource thing in the middle of the page. There are a couple of citations of Presbyterian church law that point to local governing bodies, which are now called councils, that used to be called judicatories.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
May not make policy
Yes.
that contravenes the national standard. They have to apply.
That's helpful. I also think it's really important that Amendment 10A, now G20104, also allows for non-married heterosexual persons to be ordained. So while the focus in the conversation has been about gay people, this is also a new understanding that relates to persons who are opposite-loving people. And the truth of the matter is, the majority of persons in the U.S. that are adults are not opposite-sex married people. Now, it may be that in your local congregation, as you serve and witness and minister, that the majority of folks are straight, white, married people with kids or grandkids. But the truth of the matter is, that's not the world. And there's nothing wrong with being straight, white, married with kids or grandkids. Don't get me wrong. My folks were. But let's think about what ordination equality really means. And for me, the gift, once again, it's about faith and character, and returns us to that. And frankly, that's why I mentioned, and I love your question, wouldn't it be great to have like a mandate? That's why I mentioned the don't ask, don't tell, and the conversation I heard from NPR today. General Amos saying, you know, I wasn't for it, but it's the law now. And by God, as Marines, this is who we are. And the reporter, if you heard the interview, said, well, you know, there's this Marine who's going to the Marine ball with his partner. Great, said General Amos. And I almost drove off the road. I almost didn't make it here. You know, and I'm thinking, my God. You know, and the military is the most conservative institution in our country. And so for me, I think that's been a wonderful trajectory and learning and path for the Presbyterian Church. But we also stand with the witness of the United Church of Christ, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, Unitarian Universalist, the Presbyterian Church. Who's the other? Oh yes, and of course the Anglican Church, the Episcopal Church in the U.S. So the trend, certainly among Christian denominations, is toward non-discrimination. You know, that's the trend.
That's a good segue. We have two other experts up here. Earl, as it says on your introductory sheet, served on the national panel on marriage issues. And so let's get on to the next part, and we'll have time to come back to all the unfinished pieces.
And besides that, I'm from New York. Because that's where the news is, because it was just this past summer that New York recognized marriage between same-sex partners, making it now the most populous state at this time that has same-sex marriage. And as gay and lesbian couples stood in line to get marriage licenses, ministers across the state were faced with church members who were asking, will you marry us? And sessions are being asked, now that the